My parents convinced my girlfriend to marry my brother. They said, "He's better with a stable career." Heartbroken, I left to build my life. Years later, at a grand party I hosted, they saw my wife and turned pale. Because my wife was. The air in my parents' dining room always felt thin, like there wasn't enough oxygen for me to breathe. My name is Andrew Harper. At 32, I was the starving artist of the family, a title my father spat out like a curse word. In Seattle, a city known for its rain and its music, I was just another ghost with a guitar, drifting from one low-paying gig to another. My parents, James and Linda, lived their lives by a strict blueprint: status, stability, and a hefty bank account. To them, my life was an unfinished song that had gone horribly out of tune. But then there was David. My younger brother, David, was the sun around which my parents orbited. At 29, he was a titan in the finance world, a man whose every breath seemed to be calculated for maximum profit. "Andrew, put that guitar down and eat your steak. You look like you haven't had a real meal in weeks," my father said, his eyes never leaving his plate. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a critique. "I had a gig last night, Dad." "It went well," I replied, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "A gig? You mean playing for drunks in a basement for $50? My mother sighed, a sound that cut deeper than any insult. "Why can't you be more like David? He just closed a 7-figure deal. He's building a future. What are you building, Andrew?" "Dust." I looked across the table at David. He didn't look triumphant, he looked bored. He was used to being the favorite. He was the golden child, and I was the black sheep, the cautionary tale told to the neighbor's children. The only thing that kept me sane was Sarah. Sarah was my anchor in a sea of disappointment. She was an accountant, practical and steady, but she was the only person who looked at me and didn't see a failure. When I played for her in my cramped apartment, she would close her eyes and tell me she believed in me. "You'll make it, Andrew," she'd whisper. "The world just isn't listening yet." We had been together for 2 years. I was planning to propose. I didn't have much, just a ring that belonged to my grandmother and a heart full of hope. I thought that as long as I had Sarah, I could endure my family's coldness. Then came Thanksgiving. The house was filled with the smell of roasted turkey and the suffocating scent of my mother's expensive perfume. I had brought Sarah home, hoping that if my parents saw me with a stable woman, they might finally treat me like an adult. Dinner was an exercise in humiliation. My parents spent 2 hours praising David's recent promotion and his new luxury condo. Sarah joined the conversation, her eyes wide with interest. I felt like a spectator at my own funeral. After dinner, I went to the kitchen to get more wine, but I stopped at the door when I heard voices. It was my mother and Sarah. "Sarah, dear," my mother's voice was like honey dripping over a blade. "You're such a bright, beautiful woman. You have your whole life ahead of you. Do you really see a future with a man who lives gig to gig? Andrew is? Well, he's a dreamer. And dreamers eventually wake up to find they have nothing." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I love him, Linda," Sarah said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "Love doesn't pay the mortgage, Sarah. David, now he's different. He's smart, he's driven, and he's always had a bit of a crush on you, you know. A woman like you deserves a man who can provide a legacy, not just a melody." There was a long silence. I waited for Sarah to defend us. I waited for her to say that my music was enough. I do worry sometimes," Sarah whispered. That whisper was the sound of my world shattering. I didn't enter the kitchen. I turned around, walked out the front door, and stood in the cold Seattle rain until the numbness in my chest matched the numbness in my limbs. In the weeks following Thanksgiving, the atmosphere shifted. Sarah became a ghost. Dates were canceled. Texts were left on read. When we did meet, she spoke incessantly about David. "Did you hear David bought a cabin in the mountains?" she'd say, her eyes glowing with a light that used to be reserved for my songs. "He's so focused, Andrew. It's impressive." The paranoia began to rot my mind. Then, the nightmare became a reality. I was walking to Sarah's favorite coffee shop, a ring box burning a hole in my pocket, when I saw them. Through the window, Under the warm glow of the cafe lights, sat my brother and my girlfriend. They weren't just talking. David was leaning in, his hand covering hers on the table. Sarah was laughing, a genuine, joyful laugh that I hadn't heard in months. She leaned forward and kissed him. Not a sisterly peck. A betrayal. I didn't storm in. I didn't scream. I just stood there, a broken man in a soaked jacket, watching the two people I loved most build a bridge over my corpse. I went home and packed. I didn't need much. My guitar, a few clothes, and the remnants of my pride. But before I left, I went to my parents' house one last time. I found them in the study, sipping brandy. I know, I said, my voice cold and hollow. My father didn't even look up from his paper. Know what, Andrew? I know what you did. You pushed Sarah to David. You sabotaged the only good thing I had. My mother set her glass down with a soft clink. We did what was necessary, Andrew. We saved that girl from a life of poverty. And frankly, David is the better choice. He's a winner. You're a hobbyist. He's my brother, I choked out. And he's our son, my father added. The one we're proud of. If you want to be a martyr for your art, go do it somewhere else. We're tired of carrying your weight. I realized then that I wasn't leaving a family, I was escaping a cult of status. I left Seattle that night with $2,000 in my pocket and a hole in my soul. I boarded a bus for Austin, Texas, the live music capital of the world. If I was going to fail, I was going to do it in a place where people at least respected the struggle. Austin was a fever dream of humidity and neon. I found a room in a boarding house that smelled of old cigarettes and desperation. My mattress was a thin slice of foam on a creaky floor. The heat was a physical weight, pressing me down into the dirt. I spent my days knocking on doors of bars and studios, and my nights playing for tips on 6th Street. I was invisible. I was 32, alone, and broke. News reached me through social media, though I tried to block it out. My parents posted photos of the wedding. Sarah in white. David looking like he'd just won the lottery. My parents beaming in the background. I was deleted from the family photos. It was as if Andrew Harper had never existed. I was ready to give up. I sat on a park bench one evening, staring at the Colorado River, wondering if my guitar would float or sink. Then I saw a flyer for a sound assistant at a place called Soundwave Studios. No experience required. Minimum wage. I didn't want to be an assistant, I wanted to be a star. But stars need to eat. Soundwave Studios was a graveyard for forgotten equipment. It was run by a man named Hank, who looked like he'd been carved out of old leather. He hired me because I was the only one who showed up on time. My job was to mop floors, coil cables, and make coffee that tasted like battery acid. One Tuesday, a woman walked in. She had wild, dark hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen 1,000 storms. She was carrying a crate of master tapes like they were holy relics. "Hank, tell me you have a booth open." "I'm losing my mind," she said. I froze. I knew that voice. I knew that face. "Elizabeth." I whispered. She turned, her eyes narrowing. "Do I know you?" "I'm Andrew. David's brother." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Elizabeth was David's ex-girlfriend from 5 years ago. My parents had treated her like trash because she was just a producer with no family pedigree. They had driven her out of Seattle with the same cold efficiency they had used on me. She looked at my mop, then at my worn-out shoes. A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. "So, the golden child finally kicked you out of the nest too?" We sat in a dive bar that night, two ghosts sharing a bottle of cheap whiskey. She told me her story. After my parents humiliated her and David chose his career over her, she moved to Austin and fought her way up. She was a brilliant producer, but she was struggling to get her own label off the ground. "They think they won, Andrew," she said, her voice trembling with a dormant rage. "They think they get to decide who is worthy and who isn't. But music isn't about pedigree. It's about blood. It's about the scars." We made a pact that night. An alliance of the rejected. We wouldn't just survive. We would build something that made their world look small. We called it Underdog Music. The first year was hell. We lived in the studio. We showered in the gym next door. We signed artists no one else wanted, a folk singer with a raspy voice, a rapper from the streets of San Antonio, a jazz pianist who was too old for the majors. Elizabeth was the architect, I was the soul. I used my pain to write songs for our artists, and she used her genius to make them sound like thunder. We were fueled by coffee and a burning desire for closure. Not revenge, closure. Our breakthrough came with a girl named Mia. She was 19, with a voice that could make a statue weep. We put everything we had, every cent, every hour of sleep, into her debut album, Broken Wings. The night we released the lead single, we sat in front of a laptop, watching the numbers. 100 views. 1,000 views. 10,000 views. By morning it was viral. The underdog sound became a movement. People were tired of the polished, fake stars. They wanted the raw, bleeding truth we were selling. 2 years later, Underdog Music wasn't just a label, it was an empire. We moved into a high-rise office. We were winning awards. I was no longer the black sheep. I was the visionary. But the past wasn't done with me. I was sitting in my office, looking out at the Austin skyline, when Elizabeth walked in with an envelope. "We're hosting the Underdog Gala next month," she said, her eyes gleaming. "It's the biggest event of the year. Every major label will be there. Every journalist." "And?" I asked. "I think it's time to send some invitations to Seattle." My heart skipped a beat. "Elizabeth. Andrew, they need to see it. Not because we need their approval, but because the only way to kill a ghost is to look it in the eye." I sent the invitations. To James and Linda Harper. To David and Sarah Harper. I didn't include a note. Just the gold-embossed cards. The night of the gala, the Austin Grand Theater was a sea of velvet and light. I stood backstage, wearing a suit that cost more than my father's car. Elizabeth stood beside me, radiant in emerald silk. "They're here," she whispered. I peeked through the curtain. In the front row, looking profoundly out of place, were my parents. My father looked older, grayer. My mother looked like she was trying to hide her discomfort behind a wall of jewelry. And next to them, David and Sarah. David didn't look like a titan. He looked exhausted. His suit was expensive, but it hung off him like he'd lost weight. Sarah looked miserable. The golden couple was tarnished. The show was spectacular. Mia performed, and the standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. When it was time for me to speak, I walked out onto the stage. The lights were so bright I couldn't see their faces, but I could feel their presence. This label was built on the idea that being not good enough is a lie told by people who are afraid of your potential, I said, my voice echoing through the hall. We were the rejects. We were the hobbyists. But tonight, we are the standard. After the show, in the VIP lounge, the confrontation finally happened. I was talking to a reporter from Rolling Stone when I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was my mother. Her eyes were moist, but I couldn't tell if it was from pride or shame. "Andrew," she said, her voice small. It was incredible. We had no idea." "You had an idea, Mom," I said calmly. "You just didn't believe it." My father stepped forward, extending a hand. "Son, I think we should talk about your future. Underdog is growing fast. David's firm has been having some setbacks. Maybe there's a partnership here? Families should stick together." I looked at his hand. The hand that had pointed at me in shame for 30 years. I didn't take it. "David's firm is failing because he invests in numbers, Dad. I invest in people. There is no partnership." David stepped up then, Sarah trailing. Behind him like a shadow. "Andrew, look, I'm sorry about things. It's been a rough year. Sarah, we've been struggling. If you could just give us a lead or a seat on the board." I looked at Sarah. The woman I was going to marry. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. She looked at the floor, her hands trembling. "I remember Thanksgiving," I said, looking at all of them. "I remember the kitchen. I remember you saying I was a dreamer who would wake up with nothing." "Andrew, please," my mother started. "I did wake up," I interrupted. "And I found something much better than what you offered. I found myself. I found Elizabeth. And I found a family that actually loves me." I turned to David. You took Sarah because you thought she was a trophy. Now you're realizing trophies don't help you when the market crashes. You built your life on a foundation of other people's misery. Don't be surprised when it falls apart. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just turned my back on them and walked toward Elizabeth. As they left the theater, escorted out by security because they didn't have the proper VIP passes for the after-party, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I'd been carrying since I was a child. Later that night, Elizabeth and I sat on the roof of the theater, watching the sun begin to peek over the horizon. You okay? She asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. I am, I said. The song is finished, Elizabeth. No, she smiled, taking my hand. The song is just starting. I was Andrew Harper. I was a musician. I was a success. And for the first time in my life, I was finally home.